Okay, your source for everything paranormal. Para X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
May the circle be open but unbroken. May the peace of the goddess be ever in your heart. Merry meet and merry part, and merry meet again. May the circle be open but unbroken. May the peace of the goddess be ever in your heart. Merry meet and merry part, and merry meet again.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron on the Para X Radio Network. And now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, merry meet everybody, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, a few weeks ago, author Tom Carey was here talking about his book, Roswell, The Ultimate Cold Case. And tonight he's back again to share the recently published book, Touched by Roswell. Now, Tom holds a master's degree in anthropology and a top-secret Air Force security clearance. He has investigated the Roswell Incident for the past 30 years or so, teaming with Don Schmitt since 1998. He has co-authored 8 books with Schmitt and about Roswell and is frequently interviewed on radio and TV regarding the case. Now, this new book got my attention because of a chapter in the previous book that caught my eye called Touched by Roswell. And lo and behold, that chapter was just a wee preview of the book that we're going to be talking about tonight. So it's Touched by Roswell, Crash Encounters of the Rich and Famous. Now, Tom and his co-author Don Schmitt answered the burning question, what do folks like Steven Spielberg, Ozzy Osbourne, Dave Aykroyd, and Larry King have in common? And as always, chat room people, feel free to ask questions and comments. And if anyone is listening live and wants to join us, we're at paraxradionetwork.com. So let's get to it because there's a lot of good stuff. Hi, Tom, and thank you for coming back.
Marla, it's great to be with you. Just to let you know, your audience doesn't know this, but I found the settings button. I don't know if you want me to give it a try or not, but
right now you sound good. I don't know what you did. Maybe by osmosis it worked. So.
It was someplace I never had to. It was some other setting that I never used before, so I don't know why. But
you learn something new every day.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Nice to be with you.
Well, I'm glad you're here because it was a really interesting book. And in the blurb of the book, it says that this book is a who's who of notables who are connected to the event and the town that was made famous by tourists who visited of an extraterrestrial kind. I don't think any of these notables, from actors to astronauts, from musicians to politicians, ever witnessed the Roswell crash, and probably most weren't even alive nearly 75 years ago. So what is it about Roswell, both the place and the incident, that draws people from all walks of life like flies?
Well, Marla, I don't know that it drew these people. I think Roswell came to them, and they just happened to be there at the right time. And some people, of course, went to Roswell to visit the museum there, which is dedicated to the Roswell crash of 1947. Others, they just happened to cross paths with either the city or the case or a relative, somebody like that who was involved in the case. They were not actively looking for a connection to the Roswell case, but somehow the people in the book, in their trail of life, somewhere along the line, they brushed up against the Roswell case.
Yeah, and I mean, it did make headlines. I mean, let's go back a little bit. It made great headlines. Every place you looked, they were talking about flying saucers, and then boom, they didn't talk about that anymore. It kind of went away. And but still, people believed it word of mouth. It didn't have to be in the news anymore because some people heard it and spread the word. And to this day, I mean, honestly, Roswell is a big tourist attraction for people, and for good reason, because it was such an interesting subject to begin with, the crash and all.
Yes, just to give you an idea, 2 weeks ago I did an interview with a host in South Africa. And he said, "Oh yeah, everybody down here knows about the Roswell crash. I mean, this is South Africa, another continent, several thousand miles away. And I've done shows in New Zealand, you name it, and they all have heard of Roswell. And it's the question is, why is Roswell among all other UFO cases the one that's known all around the world?" And there's several reasons for that I could go into, but I don't know if you want me to go into that.
Well, you can go into a couple of them, because, I was just going to mention something about, to this day, it's even maybe more popular than it was back then. So, yeah, give a couple of reasons. Right.
Well, as far as today is concerned, UFOs are hot right now, right? It's because of this... this video that Luis Elizondo put out 3 years ago showing this Navy pilot, their radar had zeroed in on this craft that was, sailing along there at the top speed. And it was already shown. So the Defense Department, they were put in a bind. You couldn't very well say it was a weather balloon, because everybody's seen it. It went around the world. I've seen it 100 times. A lot, I'm sure you've seen it. And it occurred on the West Coast in 2004, if I recall, on the aircraft carrier Nimitz, where they were chasing this Tic Tac. It looked like a giant Tic Tac, and no wings, no propulsion system, and how are you going to explain that away, right? You can't call that a weather balloon. So it forced the government to come to make a report. They were tasked in 2019 by then President Trump and the Senate Intelligence Committee to have the Defense Department make a report to them on what they know about UFOs. And as you know, the report came out a few weeks ago. It was somewhere between underwhelming and a joke. It told us nothing that we didn't already know. Yes, there are things flying around in the sky that we don't know about. Oh, but we'll keep on it. They don't appear to be a threat to national security, but we will keep trying to find out what they are not. That's what they emphasize. What they will find out what they are not. Well, they're not rockets. They're not weather balloons. They're not this and that and the other thing. But they're not. You're never going to see the term UFO. They invented a new one, UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. And that covers a wide spectrum of everything in the sky. But you know what we're interested in? We're interested in UFO, unidentified flying objects. We're not interested in the planet Venus. We're not interested in weather balloons. We're not interested in weather anomalies and things like that. We want to know what those craft are. And, of course, they haven't told us yet. So that's why the subject right now, Marla, of UFOs is very hot because of that. Mm-hmm. And the other thing you're never going to see is the word Roswell. You're not going to see the word Roswell, because if they mention Roswell, because that's where the cover-up started. That's where the cover-up started in 1947. So they would have to be admitting to the world that they've been lying to us for 74 years as we speak. So they put out this report that was just pablum. It was just pablum. In fact, I could have predicted what it was going to be. Now, as to why Roswell is the one case that's known all over the world. And the reason is it's the case that has attributes that no other case has. Namely, it was allegedly the crash of a nuts and bolts craft, not a landing, but a crash. There are a few cases that are fairly good, one in Westall, Australia, and another one in Zimbabwe, Africa, which are good cases with a lot of witnesses, but they're landings. They're not crashes. They didn't leave any wreckage or bodies or anything like that. But Roswell is the only one where you have a nuts and bolts crash of a physical object with little bodies attached to it. Mm-hmm. 3.5 to 4 feet tall, very frail, but with these very large pear-shaped heads. So you have this phenomenon of physical wreckage with bodies. You also have the Air Force, or the Army Air Corps, as it was called back in 1947. They put out this announcement that they had recovered a crashed flying saucer, and that's the term they used, flying saucer. And they put that out. It went on to the press wire, the Associated Press, the United Press International wire service. It went around the world in a day. And I guess they thought it would be just a local story, but it just caught the attention because Roswell was a 2-day story back in 1947. It occurred. You know what the start of the modern age of UFOs. It was the Kenneth Arnold sighting of June 24th, 1947, where Kenneth Arnold, a Boise, Idaho businessman, saw 9 objects that were crescent-shaped. They were flying between Mount Rainier and some other mountain out there in the state of Washington at a very high speed. And somebody said, well, what did they look like? He said, well, if you take a saucer and toss it horizontally across water, it'll skip. Mm-hmm. It won't slide. It'll skip. And they say, oh, a flying saucer, and that's how the term got into common use. Mm-hmm. So that's when the modern age of flying saucers took place. Was that day, June 24th, 1947. The Roswell case, the Roswell crash, occurred a week and a half later. So, this is real early in the game. And so all of a sudden, the United States Army Air Corps has in its possession a spaceship from somewhere else with 5 alien occupants, 4 of whom were dead and 1 was still alive. What do we do with this? So they decided ultimately, fairly quickly, to cover it up. Mm-hmm. Because I think what came into play was 2 things. The Cold War had just begun with the Soviet Union and the Communist bloc. It actually began a year previously in 1946, but it was still fresh. And you don't want your enemy to know that you have this exotic technology, because Russia had very, very good spies. They populated the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb. They had spies there, so there's no doubt they would have sent spies to try to get information on this crash of a flying saucer. So that was one aspect that they had to consider. The other was a few years earlier in 1938, they had this radio broadcast called The War of the Worlds. It was a radio drama on the Mercury Theater of the Air on the radio they played it like it was a newscast, like they were having another show, and they broke in with this news flash. Folks, there's been a landing of Martians in Grover City, New Jersey, blah, 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 blah. But really, it was just a production of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. And the the East Coast of the United States went into panic. They went into full panic because they thought it was a real news broadcast. So you had those two items at play, and so they said, okay, we don't want to have the country in complete panic. We don't want the Soviets to get their hands on this technology. Let's cover it up and try to give us some time more time to figure out what to do. Meanwhile, they had already put out that press release that they had captured. They said captured a flying saucer. But that was either a local. My co-author Don Schmitt and I disagree. This is the only thing we disagree on. I think it was a local faux pas by the base commander at Roswell, and Don believes it was like an orchestrated plan hatched in Washington D.C. First put out this story of a spaceship, and then take it away by saying it was a weather balloon and make everybody feel silly for believing the first story. So, we disagree on that. But that's what happened. It was a 2-day story, and the world was really, they were waiting for more information, and the rug was pulled out by this press release that it was a weather balloon. So 30 years goes by, and the base intelligence officer at formerly the 509th Bomb Group in Roswell, Jesse Marcel, he broke his silence. He was the first military person out at the crash site, right? So everybody was threatened with the prison, or civilians were threatened with death if they ever talked about this. Because civilians got to the site before the military, and they saw everything, And Jesse Marcel was the first military person there, and so everybody was threatened who knew. And the story lay dormant for 31 years, from 1947 to 1978, when Jesse Marcel, who was suffering from emphysema, he figured, he didn't know how much longer he had. He went public with his story that he actually had his hands on wreckage from a flying saucer that had crashed near Roswell. And that was 1978. Stanton Friedman got a hold of the story, and he hooked up with William Moore, who had just had a big hit book out called The Philadelphia Experiment, about a ship during World War II that was rendered invisible, supposedly. And so he teamed up with William Moore and began the civilian investigation of the Roswell Incident in 1978. 2 years later, they published the first book on it called The Roswell Incident, and that brought the story to the public in a book form, because there was real silence on it for 31 years. So the authors were William Moore, and they brought in Charles Berlitz, the famous language expert, because Charles Berlitz had just had a big hit book himself called The Bermuda Triangle, right? So they figured, well, Stanton Friedman doesn't have a big name, but we'll bring in Charles Berlitz, because he's got a big name for this Bermuda Triangle thing. And William Moore, he had this book on the Philadelphia Experiment. Let's team them up and call them the co-authors. Meanwhile, Moore and Friedman did all the research. And so they published that book in 1980. And I know myself, when I heard about it, I because I was interested in UFOs, I never heard of Roswell, New Mexico. I thought they were talking about Roseville, California. you know, I used to live in Sacramento, and there was a town just east of Sacramento called Roseville. And I thought, oh, they must be talking about Roseville, but it was Roswell, New Mexico. And so I read the book, and I was blown away. I was blown away because, oh my God, we got a crash saucer somewhere, and it just captured my imagination. Well, another 10 years went by before the next book on Roswell was written. It was 10 years before another Roswell book was written in 1991 by my cohorts, Kevin Randall and Don Schmitt. And I believe it was that book, Marla, that really kick-started the worldwide fascination with the Roswell incident, because they had so many more witnesses to the case than did the first book. The first book they interviewed Jesse Marcel and the son of Mac Brazel, who was the rancher, and a couple family members, and that was it. And Randall and Schmitt, they had over 100 witnesses for UFO crash at Roswell. That's what the book was called, 1991. And they became very well known, as did the story, because it was so much more believable now, because they had so many more witnesses, and they had citations in there. I don't recall now whether the Roswell Incident book had where citations where you footnote things.
Yeah.
I don't know that they had it, but the 1991 book did, and so that really, at least in my humble opinion, is what really made the case famous around the world, was that 1991 book by Randall and Schmitt.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about some of these really interesting stories in this new book, because they're all about as different as the rich and famous people that they're talking about. And it was really an interesting book. I found it hard to put down. And the first story I want to talk about is the story of Elvis Presley's tie to Roswell. I mean, it wasn't at all what I expected, seriously.
You thought he was going to sing a rock and roll song.
I didn't see this coming. So tell everybody about Elvis Presley's tie.
Yes. First, I'd like to say this book is called Touched by Roswell, Crash Encounters of the Rich and Famous. It's the 10th book that Don Schmitt and I have co-authored. It's the 10th book. And we actually, in our immediately previous book called Roswell, the Ultimate Cold Case Closed, which we thought was going to be the last book, we had a chapter in that book called Touched by Roswell. And we had such positive feedback on that one chapter that we said, hey, let's see if we could do a whole book on this. And lo and behold, we have a book here that has, and I counted them, there's 127 or 126 people that we cite in this book, that we talk about, that had close encounters with the Roswell case, and Elvis Presley is one of them.
Yes.
Now, Elvis didn't know it, but it came about a few years ago that this is like after Elvis was gone. I think he died in 1976, if I recall, 1976. And so just a few years ago, maybe 2005 or so, but, we're still researching the case, and we were in Roswell, Don Schmitt and I wanted to get a picture of where the little bodies that were recovered from the craft were loaded into a B-29 to be flown to Fort Worth, Texas, and then on to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. So it was called, back in 1947, it was at what they called Bomb Pit Number 1. That's where they loaded the atomic bombs into the B-29s. They'd open up the bomb bay, and the B-29 would hover over this area that was sort of sunken in the ground where they would keep the bomb, and the bomb was loaded up. Because the 509th, their mission, they're still around today, and the mission is the same. There is to drop atomic weaponry on enemies. And back in 1945, they dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan to end World War II. That was the 509th Bomb Group at Roswell. And the group is still in existence today. It's the 509th Bomb Wing at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. I can't pronounce the name of the town. I just can't pronounce it right, so I'm not even going to give it. But they're still in existence today. But as far as Elvis is concerned, you see, the thing is, everything leads me to everything triggers another memory, and. So we're on the base. Don Schmitt and I are on the base. I want to see where this bomb pit was located. Well, we finally found it where bomb pit number 1 was, but it's been all cemented over, right? The bomb pit's no longer there. It's cemented over, and it's like a circular cul-de-sac. I said, well, this is where it was. So I took a couple pictures of it. And it's in one of the pictures is in the book. So we're on our way out, and we see this neat-looking personal jet aircraft. It was a Lockheed Electra, and so we went over to it, and it was bright red and silver, I believe. And we said, "Oh my goodness, this must be the aircraft of somebody famous." So we thought, well, we looked inside, and the inside of it was all red velvet, And we said, "Oh my goodness! I wonder if this was Elvis's plane." Well, we didn't know, so I took a couple pictures of the plane too, and so we went to the base. The fellow who ran the base there and allowed us to go under because they store a lot of airplanes there, a lot of passenger planes. The old base is like where planes go to die. They're them there for parts. They cannibalize parts for other aircraft, and so we said, "Who owned that plane, that red Lockheed Electra?" And he said, "Oh, that was Elvis's plane." Well, Elvis didn't know it, but that plane was within 50 yards of where they loaded the little bodies into the bomb bay of a B-29 in 1947. That plane was there for 35 years. Elvis's plane was stored there right next to where the bombs, the little bodies were loaded for transport out of Roswell. It was stored there for 35 years, and it was finally sold in 2017 for $440,000. Now, I said, "Oh my goodness, I knew I had the close-up of the plane, but I went back and I looked at the picture of the bomb pit where I took the picture of the bomb pit, and there in the distance you can see Elvis's plane. I didn't know it at the time, but you can see it in the photo of the bomb pit. It's so close to the bomb pit." And that was just fortuitous, but Elvis, that's Elvis's contact with Roswell. His personal plane was stored there near the bomb pit number 1 for 35 years.
All right. I guess we have like a minute before we go to break, but there's a quick question from the chat room. Cece says, how much impact did the Travis Walton abduction have on UFO credibility, and was there any military investigation?
Oh my goodness. I know Travis Walton, and of all the abduction cases, Marla, I put his at the top.
Yeah.
Of all the abduction cases, I put his. I'm not a big abductionist because Roswell takes all my time.
Right.
But of the abduction cases, at least in my mind, his is at the top, the very top. Now, I don't know if I doubt if the military or the government investigated, because I don't think they're doing that. If they are, they don't want anybody to know about it.
Yeah. Well, it probably did have some impact on UFOs in general. I mean, because abduction things are um, the most interesting to people. I mean, seeing a flying saucer, everybody's seen a UFO, blah, blah, blah. But then you hear, stories from abductees, and some of them sound extremely credible, which they probably are.
Well, the UFO phenomenon is variegated. I like Roswell. Others like abductions. Some people like cattle mutilations. Other people like crop circles. And, my experience is if you like one or the other, you don't like the others, because you're only interested in what you're interested in. And for me, it's Roswell. Crop circles don't do anything for me. Abductions are fairly interesting in some of them, and but I don't dwell on them because Roswell is really labor intensive because we have over 600 witnesses on the record, so
yeah,
that's what takes all our time.
It's amazing. All right, we're going to take a break and get ready. I'm going to warn you ahead of time. I want to talk about Jackie Gleason and his thing with Roswell because, again, that was another thing. I didn't see it coming. So anyway, we're going to go to break. Everybody stay put, and we'll be back in 2 minutes.
Stirring the Cauldron will be right back, so don't go away.
If you end up with webbed feet,
Remember, you've been warned.
Hey everyone, it's Marla. If you like tonight's episode of Stirring the Cauldron and the archive podcast as well, take a look at the show's YouTube channel and check out the dozens of shows that are there just waiting to be heard. New shows are added each week, and while you're there, why not subscribe? It's free. And if you click on that tiny little bell icon at the top of the page, you'll be notified when new shows are available. Just go to youtube.com and then type in Stirring the Cauldron Para X and the link will appear. Just like magic.
For almost 2 decades, Midnight Syndicate has composed the soundtrack to your darkest nightmares. The imaginations of fans worldwide have been fueled by its gothic, horror, and fantasy symphonic albums. A staple of the haunted house and amusement park industry, for many, the music of Midnight Syndicate is the music of Halloween. Now, Midnight Syndicate will bring your nightmares to life in a spectacle of sound from beyond the grave.
Welcome back to Stirring the Cauldron. Once again, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
And welcome back. And my guest tonight is author Tom Carey, and we're talking about his new book, Touched by Roswell. So, there are some seemingly unlikely people in the book. Some are very famous. Some are just like, you shake your head and say, what the hell do they have to do with Roswell? It's very, very cool. So, Jackie Gleason. I was very surprised to see his name. But this is an amazing story because it includes Gleason's strong interest in the paranormal and UFOs, and we didn't really know about that. I mean, back then it wasn't something that he would talk about. And, as I was reading the story, one of his honeymooners' catchphrases was, "To the moon, Alice," right? And now that that reading has a different connection. It just makes a little bit more sense. So let's talk about the phrase and the whole new meaning and what does he have to do with Roswell?
Yes, actually, to be honest with you, Marla, is reading his story. Let me tell the story first, and then because Jackie Gleason was a just an amazing person. He was a comedian first. He was a movie actor. He was TV. He had his own TV shows. And what most people don't know is that he was a music composer. He had his own orchestra, and many of his albums were bestsellers. And he was just amazing as a all-around entertainer. Mm-hmm. He was the first great one. They called him the Great One. Now, your hockey fans, if you have any hockey fans out there, you know who the Great One was Wayne Gretzky. Yeah. And if you're a conservative politician or a conservative, you know that Sean Hannity refers to Mark Levin as the Great One. So, but the first one was Jackie Gleason, and he. In addition to all of that stuff, his two obsessions were golfing and UFOs, the paranormal, especially UFOs. In fact, he had his home. His original shows were out of New York City, but at some point he felt he had to make a change, so he moved his shows in 1964 to Miami, Florida, and he built a home overlooking a golf course. You know, so he didn't have far to walk to play golf. And his home was built in the shape of a flying saucer. His home was circular. It was built in the shape of a flying saucer, and his library was said to hold over 1,500 books of UFOs and the paranormal. So he was really into the subject. Well, Richard Nixon, when he was president from 1968 to 1974, I believe, or 73. He was also a golfer, and he had a vacation home in Key Biscayne, Florida, not far from Miami, as well as he had a West Coast vacation retreat. I forget the name. I forget it now, but the one in Key Biscayne was close enough to the Gleason home that he could drive it. Well, as fate would have it, they got together to play golf, and they actually became golfing buddies. Well, somewhere along the line, and the two of them would golf together. And, when you're golfing, there's a lot of talking going on. So it's somewhere along the line, Gleason, no doubt, expressed his interest in UFOs. And Nixon said, interested in UFOs, are you? And so he kept that in mind. And so one day the golfing expedition was over. Nixon goes home, and Gleason goes home. Well, that evening, there's a knock on Jackie Gleason's door. There's President Nixon all by himself, no security entourage with him. And he says, "Come on, Jackie, I want to show you something." So they get into the car. Nixon, the President of the United States, is driving, and it's just the two of them. And they go to Homestead Air Force Base. And, of course, the guards there, they recognize the both of them, and so they wave them on through. And Nixon takes them into an underground facility. So it's a long walk. They're walking down a hallway. Gleason he says he saw a strange record. And we get this story from his wife, Beverly McKittrick. She was his wife for almost 10 years. So the story doesn't come to us from Jackie. It comes from his wife, Beverly McKittrick. And she said that he came home that night. She remembered he was out with Nixon, and he comes home after midnight. He looks just really, really distraught. He was really upset. And so he told her what had happened. And he said that they were taken down this hallway. And Nixon, they went into this room. There was a guard in front of the room who let them in. And there were 4 gurneys with little bodies on them. Now, he described the bodies as being like 2.5 feet tall, small heads and large ears. Now, those don't sound like the Roswell bodies, which were described as 3.5 to 4 feet tall with frail bodies and large heads, pear-shaped. These sound like bodies from something else, another crash perhaps. And according to Beverly McKittrick, Jackie told her that there had been a recent crash near the base, Homestead in Florida, and that's where the wreckage and the bodies were taken. We included the story in the book because it was because of who it was, and because it involved wreckage and bodies just like Roswell. So out of respect to Jackie and that story, we included it in the book. But it doesn't sound like the Roswell, New Mexico crash because of the description of the little bodies. Yeah, but it's interesting and kind of a follow-up question to that. To your knowledge, has every president since 1947 been taken to the base, Wright-Patterson or wherever, and seen bodies and parts of wreckage? I mean, is it mandatory for a president to see this? No. As a matter of fact, we think most have not on a need-to-know basis, believe it or not, or they have been. Most presidents been allowed there. The ones that we do believe, besides Harry Truman, who was there, he was part of the story. Yeah. Other than Harry Truman, we think George Herbert Walker Bush knew about them, if not taken there, because he was the head of the CIA at some point. He was the ambassador to the United Nations at some point. He was a vice president at some point, and he was the president at some point. So we figure George Herbert Walker Bush, that's George W. Bush's father, we believe he definitely knew. We also believe that his son George W. Bush knew, and I have a little story about that. We believe that Clinton did not, because he professed. He had copies of our books. Our first book, Witness to Roswell, he was personally given a copy of that book, and he still professes. Well, I don't know about it. I wish they would tell me. And that's my. There you go. You get extra points for that. But we believe that he didn't know, because he sent Webster Hubbell, his deputy attorney general, when they took office in 1990, January 93, he told Webster, "You find out for me two things: who killed JFK, and did Roswell really happen?" And Hubbell finally got back to Clinton, and he said, "I couldn't get anywhere on the UFO thing because everybody was stonewalling me." So Clinton didn't know. Well, he suspected, no doubt, but he just never got to see the real stuff. After Clinton was, oh my goodness. We also believe Ronald Reagan knew. Ronald Reagan, because he had his own UFO sighting. He traveled to Roswell several times, and on his last trip there, he held a big speech, and he camped out. He had the speech right in front of the main hangar where all the Roswell wreckage and bodies were taken. Now, that didn't happen just by chance. I hope you believe me on that, because that's where everything went from the crash sites. It went right to that big hangar. That's where Reagan had gave his big speech down there in Roswell. So we believe he certainly knew. Whether he saw it or not, we don't know, but he certainly knew. Dick Cheney, I forget who he was. Was vice president for George W. He certainly knew, and we believe George W. knew. Now, about George W., let me see, who followed W? Was it Obama? Yeah, Obama. Obama gets off. He traveled to Roswell for something, some sort of political reason, and he gets off the plane at the Roswell airport, and the first words out of his mouth were "Klaatu Murata Nikto," which was said in the famous movie "The Day the Earth Stood Still." That was the thing they said to the alien robot to get him moving. "Klaatu Murata Nikto," and those were the first words out of Obama's mouth when he landed in Roswell. So, yeah, we suspected he might have known something, but whether he saw anything, we don't think so.
Yeah.
But, anyway, remember Dana Perino on Fox News? She was a member of this group that came on at 5 p.m. every day called The Five. There were 5 of them sat around a table discussing political things.
Mm-hmm.
And she was formerly George W. Bush's press secretary for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And so this one day, the question for every member on the panel was, if you were president, what was the first thing you would do? Well, when it got down around Dana Perino, she said, well, the first thing I would do after praying would be to ask for the Roswell file. That's what she said. She said, after praying, I would ask for the Roswell file. And she said that at one point she was in a private conversation with George W. Bush, and she asked him, she said, when you assumed the office of the president, did you ask for the Roswell file? And according to Dana Perino, she said, he didn't say anything. He just winked. And that he never answered the question.
Mm-hmm.
So she also now I'm mixing her up with Shirley MacLaine, but
another one that's attached to Roswell. Yeah.
Yes. She interviewed Don Schmitt and myself on her radio show after our second book on Roswell came out in 2009, Witness to Roswell. And I know Shirley MacLaine's a great actress, beautiful, nominated many times for an Oscar. I think she finally won one for Terms of Endearment.
Mm-hmm.
And so she interviewed us on her radio show, and I actually feel that Don and I were not far out enough for her, if you know what I mean. Because we're nuts and bolts investigators, like Joe Friday, just the facts, man. And I feel that we were not far out enough for her. But she said that she had her own sighting, which got her interested in UFOs. And she said that she had a private conversation with the former president, Jimmy Carter.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that in that private conversation, Jimmy Carter told her, yes, we have physical wreckage from crashed UFOs, but I can't say that publicly. Mm-hmm. And that's what he told Shirley MacLaine. Mm-hmm. So the physical wreckage at that time would have been Roswell. So that's Jimmy Carter's contact. Certainly, he knew, and he passed that information on to Shirley MacLaine, who is in our book, by the way.
Yes, and you have other people like Gordon Cooper. You talk about Edgar Mitchell. You talk about Prince Hans Adam of Liechtenstein. I can't even say that.
Yes.
But there's also there's also an honorable mention chapter in the book, and there's nice little tidbits like some of the famous people like Demi Moore and John Denver, who were born in Roswell, and then this one was very timely. Sir Richard Branson, the English business tycoon, multi-billionaire, and CEO of the Virgin Group, and a couple of weeks ago took flight into space himself. And he had sent a representative to Roswell, to the Roswell Museum in 2005 with an offer to purchase the museum.
They turned them down.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, he had a good vision.
I wish he would have asked me.
Yeah. That
I would have said, "Come on in."
Yeah. Well, you missed your opportunity, but anything like that.
There's one name in there that in that section that you're talking about that that I really like is this character actor Charles Martin Smith.
Mm-hmm.
He in the movie the one with Ron Howard where it's 1962 American Graffiti. He played the Toad. One of I keep wanting to call Ron Howard Richie Cunningham, but he played the Toad, which was one of Ron Howard's high school buddies. He was also in the Buddy Holly story. He played the bass guitarist. The story is starring. When I try to remember these names, Gary Busey.
Mm-hmm.
Gary Busey played Buddy Holly. Well, Charles Martin Smith played the Jerry Allison, the bass player. Did a good job, and he also was in the movie Deep Impact. He played the astronomer Martin Wolf, who died trying to take the message of this oncoming comet to the authorities to try to do something about it. He died in a car accident on the way. He had a very small part, but he was in it. Those are the parts I remember him for. But in the movie Roswell, there's one movie about Roswell that is really good. In fact, it's the only movie that I know of that is really about Roswell, other than where somebody mentions it. This is about the Roswell story, made in 1994. Simply called Roswell. Charles Martin Smith played the Sheriff George Wilcox in that movie. And so that was his connection to Roswell. And the other thing was I got to talk to Charles Martin Smith on the set.
Mm.
I had just joined the Randall and Schmitt team, and they were filming in Bisbee, Arizona. That's where the large part of the movie was filmed, in Bisbee, Arizona, and we were on the set, and Charles Martin Smith was sitting by he had just done his role, and so I got to talk to him, and mostly I talked to him, believe it or not, about the Buddy Holly movie where he was a member of the Crickets. It was Buddy Holly and the Crickets.
Yeah.
And I wanted, so I got to talk to him quite lengthy. Great guy, and that's why I remember him is in that role in the Roswell movie. He played the sheriff.
There are so many people in there, like you said, 100 different people with 100 different stories. And before we get kicked out of here, like I think I may mention, or at least alluded to, the two stories that really surprised me the most were Elvis and Jackie Gleason. So was there one story that stood out among the others for you for some reason or another?
Yes, exactly. The Tom Brookshire story. Now, most of the people outside of Hans Adam II of Liechtenstein, and
you're showing off now. Go ahead.
And we were just talking about
Tom Brookshire.
Tom Brookshire. Most of them were, actors and actresses, right? Most of them were actors and actresses. But Tom Brookshire was a player in the National Football League for the Philadelphia Eagles. And that's how I knew him. He was a defensive back, and he played for the Eagles, and he was on his way to a Hall of Fame career, but he broke his leg, his tibia, and it ended his career too early. Well, I'm down in Roswell with my wife. I took her down there in 2008 to show her this is where I come every year to give a talk at the museum. And so we were walking around Roswell looking at what sites they had there, and we came upon this football stadium that was part of the New Mexico Military Institute, which is a military high school there. And so she went off in one direction, I went off in another, and then I hear, Tom, come over here. So I go over, and she says, look at this. And it was this bronze plaque with the names of all of the high school players who had played in that stadium, who had gone on to play in the NFL, the National Football League. There were about a dozen names on there. One that stood out was oh my goodness! Every time I try to come up with it, Roger Staubach, the famous quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. And the first name on this list was Tom Brookshire. I said, Tom Brookshire? I didn't know he was from Roswell. And he went on to play with the Eagles. So I said, I got to make sure to call him up when I get back home in Pennsylvania. So I get back home, and the first thing I do is I ring up Tom Brookshire. By that time, I had I had a computer. I got his name off the internet. So I called him, and I got his answering machine. So I said, Tom, my name is Tom Carey. I understand you're from Roswell, New Mexico. Blah, 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 blah. I'd like to talk to you about the Roswell case. And, oh, by the way, I thought you were a great defensive back for the Eagles, but you couldn't cover this number 23 for the Cleveland Browns. So I figured that'll get him. Well, within 10 minutes, my phone rings. It's Tom Brookshire, and he says, Carey, you don't know what you're talking about. What game are you watching? So it worked. He called me back. We spent the next hour and a half talking about the Roswell case. He gave me a number of witnesses to look up the next time it was in Roswell, which was very nice, and they were good witnesses too. But as far as he was concerned, he remembered the lockdown that the base went into. He was 16 years old at the time when the incident happened. He said the base south of town went into lockdown, and it stayed that way for about a week. And he knew a lot of the airmen there because his father had a service station on Main Street in Roswell, and then a lot of the servicemen would fill up their cars there, and he got to know a number of them. But after the lockdown was lifted, they came to a station, but they wouldn't talk to him anymore. They wouldn't talk to anybody. They just filled up the tanks and left. He said it changed the relationship between the town and the base forever, for as long as he was there, because after that, neither trusted the other. And the other thing was he got to actually handle a piece of the so-called memory metal, the famous piece of wreckage that you could wad up in your hand and twist it around, and it would just unfurl itself without a crease, and you couldn't cut it, scratch it, bend it, do anything to it. And he actually got to handle a piece of that from a local welder in town who had gotten a piece from somebody else who had been at the crash site. So he was not only a first-hand witness to the memory metal and the lockdown, but he also gave me a number of other witnesses to interview, and we had a conversation like we were old friends. And and here's a famous football player that I had admired for years. And
see, there you go. All right, we've got about a minute, not even. Give everybody your website, and then we got to dance out of here.
Okay, our website, which is down at the moment, I have to report, and I don't know why, is www.roswellinvestigator.com. That's all one word, www.roswellinvestigator.com. Now, if you go there and it's down, we're trying to get it back. We don't know what happened, but we're trying to get it back up. It may be back up now. I don't know, but we're working on it.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody who's listening in. And we're off the air. So good night, everybody. Blessed be, and merry meet again.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at the same time for another great guest and more fun. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2009.
You have been listening to the Para X Radio Network.